So I have seen matriarchies come up multiple times from other content creators who talk about feminism. And one of the conversations that is had around it is that if we had a matriarchy, not a patriarchy, that people are underestimating the violence that women would be able to inflict or would inflict. The way that it was framed is, haven't you ever seen women and like how their language and wording and like all of that can be violent without physically being violent? And it doesn't sit right with me. I am Indigenous, and as an Indigenous woman, I went to school for pre-law and politics, and I sit back. It is impossible for really a lot of us to even grasp what a matriarchy would look like because we have been raised in patriarchy. Matriarchy is not the inverse of patriarchy. It's not just, flip the world and women are in charge and the same things are happening. We have examples of matriarchies, but a lot of that has been lost over time because it has been lost through the lens of patriarchy. Even people, it was once stamped out, right? And not only was it stamped out through violence, any conversations of it or any dissecting of matriarchy has been done through the lens of people who have been raised in patriarchy. It has a patriarchal lens. Not only that, but a lot of the research, a lot of the topic around matriarchy has been done through not only the lens of patriarchy, but through the lens of men. Because for a long time, men were the only ones allowed to be in school and research and, publish articles. So I am starting, it's kind of like a book club, but it's not really a book club. So this is the first book I'm starting with, Matriarchal Society, Studies on Indigenous Cultures Across the Globe. Now, basically what this is going to be, you can try it for a week for free. It's going to be me like summarizing the information and giving you the information so that you can learn as I learn without having to dive into textbooks to do so. But to give you an idea of what this book is going to cover, so it's going to cover the microstructures of matriarchal society as well as the macro structures. So the macro structures, the institutions that refer beyond family and clan systems to larger social structures. In certain chapters, these large-scale forms of social and political organization even refer beyond one single matriarchal people to encompass connections of several matriarchal tribes, although these large intertribal forms are highly diverse. They are examples of the way matriarchal societies with their patriarchal forms of politics are able to create states, if one wants to call them that. In general, I avoid the use of the term state, which has from the very beginning of written history till today been understood as an institution of hierarchical organized domination. In this sense, matriarchal societies did not form states. They were stateless and free of domination, so the term matriarchal state is somehow self-contradictory. But the state argument is often used as evidence that such societies were too primitive to effectively develop large-scale forms of social and political organization, that is, to create states. The contrary, however, is demonstrated by the complex political forms that include several societies and extend over large geographical areas. These complexities of these large-scale matriarchal forms is even vaster and more striking than those of patriarchal states. Their hierarchical pressure from above keeps everything and everyone in line, which matriarchal people base their largest forms on the equal value of every member. In this and in their fundamentally peace-oriented politics, matriarchal societies serve as an important model for future societies beyond patriarchy that are just and peaceful. This work can support women in the feminist struggle by introducing them to better forms of society that profoundly value women and their creativity, and it can support men in their alternative movements, giving them another way of identifying as men by demonstrating that war and violence are not the only innate heritage of mankind. When covering even like Indigenous history, it's really important to remember that like that is being told through the lens of patriarchy. A lot of the times it is being told through the lens of men retelling information. But even through that, when they are discussing the way that Indigenous people interacted or cross-culturally, right? And they would move across North America and they were largely nomadic, but not exclusively nomadic. The way that they would describe them was primitive, right? But that is because Indigenous culture, not all, but a lot, were very what we would consider now socialist. So very much in the gift giving, and in a lot of cultures, the more gifts and the more you were able to share with others in Indigenous culture, the higher you were viewed in society. But we are very limited in our ability of understanding how different those societies function from our current society because we are only really exposed to the concepts that we have been exposed to. An example of this would be me coming on the internet and talking about politics and saying that I'm not really right-leaning and I'm not really left-leaning because I don't really align with a lot of those political definitions. And even the people who follow me that I'm mutuals with, as well-intentioned as a lot of them are, and a lot of educated individuals, I had comments left by some of them saying like, oh, well, you're definitely leftist, or your beliefs are leftist. And it's like their concept of politics cannot exist outside of the framework that we currently exist in. Right? So when I went to school and university for politics and I was learning about it, there was always this concept in my mind that reserves were different, right? Like I was hyper aware of this the entirety of my childhood into my teen years, that reserves were run differently. And so when I come on the internet, having gone to university for politics, and say that I don't align with any political definition that is on that the scale and the graph, and then having other people come in and be like, oh, well, I think you actually align here. I don't align with any of those things because I do not exist within this political spectrum, because the way that I grew up is very different. There are political spectrums outside of what patriarchy has deemed to be political ideologies, right? And that is a very narrow window to look at politics through. Is like, and even when I talk to other Indigenous people and they don't want to vote because they don't feel attached to this political system that has been imposed upon us and them and their ancestors. And the fact that even when it came to Indigenous rights to vote, that was women in white European women in North America got the right to vote before Indigenous men and women did. That was intentional because the way that the system has been set up in Canada specifically has been to other Indigenous people from the system that currently exists, right? This system exists and fundamentally functions the way that they would like it to function, the way that it was built to function, if Indigenous people don't have a say. Same with when it comes to the United States and Black Americans. That is largely why they have done so many things and created so many barriers for Black people to vote in the United States. The same way that they are trying to create those barriers for women now, they have existed for a long time. So when you look at the incarceration rates in the United States, it is heavily skewed towards Black and brown, right? Like that is, but specifically more towards Black. Now, when you look at the statistics in Canada, that is towards Indigenous people. When you look at the rates of incarceration for Indigenous people, it is significantly higher, even though they make up a significantly smaller percentage of the population. So how do you tell these groups of people that the only system or only political system that they can align themselves with or believe in or say that they agree with has to exist within this narrow, white, Eurocentric viewpoint? And maybe it won't fundamentally change, but you can educate yourself on other things outside of this scope of politics. So that's kind of what the book club will be diving into, is like dissecting this information, putting the information out for other people, including what I find to be important quotes. And so that you don't have to dive into this, but we can have conversations around it. I'm debating like making polls, and I already have the next book that I'm going to be doing after this one. If it's something you want to participate in, it's going to be in my link tree where you find everyone else's information. I've also managed to put my IG in there, which I've been scared to do because I'm scared of moderation and what happened with my last account. But if you go follow me there, and then I'm going to be introducing long form content on YouTube that is going to be different than what I have on TikTok. I am uploading my TikToks there, but there will be longer form content there as well.